What comes to mind when you hear the name Albert Einstein? I imagine you might say things like physics, space-time, great hair, relativity, E equals mc squared, perhaps the violin, or maybe those coefficients from quantum mechanics if you're really a nerd. But you know what probably did not come up for most people? Socialism, which is fair. It's not obvious why such a thing would be relevant to one of the world's most renowned scientists. But just like with the mind-bendingly relative nature of time he so famously deduced, something being not obvious doesn't make it not true. Einstein was a socialist, and a pretty outspoken one at that. He actually wrote a whole essay about it, which I recently read for the first time, and as a semi-retired physicist who now likes to rant about the politics of science online, I have some thoughts. So join me today as we deep dive into the political beliefs of the greatest physicist who ever lived and ponder the question, should we even care?
بما أنكم كنتم أصدقاء جلسوا حدثونني عليه أحب السفر جنوبا وشمالا من أجل سعادته وافقت حدثوني عنه. So before we dig into the essay, let's build up the context in which it was published. Introducing Einstein feels silly, so I'm just gonna jump into where the timeline gets interesting. In 1914, a 35-year-old Albert Einstein moves to Berlin for a university position, and because his mistress lived there. That's one way to solve the two-buddy problem with your physicist wife, I guess. It was during his time in Berlin that Einstein did the science that shot him to international megastardom. In 1915, he published his famed theory of general relativity, which would be confirmed just 4 years later, and only 2 years after that, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. Fun fact, his Nobel Prize wasn't for relativity or the equation he's most famous for. It was actually for his work on something called the photoelectric effect. Same energy as Al Pacino winning an Oscar for Son of a Woman, but not Scarface or The Godfather. So by the time Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Einstein was respected enough as a brilliant physics mind to immigrate to the US and take a position at Princeton. In the years that follow, World War II breaks out, the Allied forces defeat Germany, and the relationship between the previously allied Soviet Union and USA begins to deteriorate, with the Cold War kicking off around 1947. See, the US really didn't like this whole communism thing coming from the East, and they certainly didn't want it muddying up our most free and democratic utopia, so of course, the government began an aggressive campaign of political repression and persecution of the American left, known today as McCarthyism. And it was in 1949, amid this backdrop of fear and suspicion at left-wing people and ideas, when Einstein published the essay, Why Socialism, in the first issue of the Marxist magazine Monthly Review. And that essay is the starting point of our conversation today. But real quick, I just want to clarify what it is that I do and do not intend to do here. This is not a video about economic theory. It is a video about Einstein's politics and what we today can learn from them. So to the people in my audience who readied their lists of old white guys they think I need to read the moment I said socialism, I'm sure you're a great time at parties. Tell me more about theory, said no one ever. Here's what I actually will be discussing. First, I'll recap the essay. If you want to read it yourself, you can, of course. It's only a few pages long and there's a link to it in my references, but if you haven't yet, I'll catch you up on the main points and share some of my takeaways. Then we're going to zoom out a bit and consider the question, should we even care about someone's political opinions because they're good at physics? And finally, we're going to explore an aspect of Einstein's surprisingly substantial political agenda that I think is even less known than his socialism, and use it to understand what it means to be political as a physicist. You either know exactly what I'm talking about, or you're about to be shook at the turn this video is gonna take. My references will all be given on screen, and you can find links to most of them in the document linked in the description below, where I'll also make any corrections to my statements if needed. And I think that's all we need to get started. All right, Einstein the dirty commie, let's go.
So let's start with the SparkNotes version of the essay. I'm just gonna recap it as if I was him talking. Here, let me get into character. Einstein stole that pose from Meg Thee Stallion, by the way. He came up with relativity to time travel to the future and steal her riz. Sorry, I'll be serious now. Everyone's saying that society is getting bad, which is bad because when people think society is bad, they start to resent it. Like, I was talking to this guy one time, and when I told him how I think we could maybe prevent the next humanity-ending war, he literally just said, "Why do you care so much if all of us die?" The fuck kind of doomer incel shit is that? No one used to talk like that. Why is everyone so hopeless now? Well, let's talk about human nature for a second. Inside you, there are two wolves. The social one that knows it relies deeply on mutual cooperation with other people, and the solitary one that wants to self-actualize and change the world. We're completely reliant on massive collective efforts to eat, to have shelter, to be safe. We need a society to exist. But we also have individual consciousnesses that use traditions and institutions and science and art to influence society. And there's a bit of a feedback loop here, because the changes people make to society affect us as its members in many ways, including how much we listen to each of those two wolves. The combination of these two conflicting drives, that is our nature. But their ratio is variable. Maybe some of who we are is set in stone by biology or the conditions of modernity, but if we want to improve our lives, we have to remember that because society is subject to change at our hand, part of our nature is too. Okay, breaking character for a second to get this next part straight from the horse's mouth.
I have now reached the point where I may indicate briefly what to me constitutes the essence of the crisis of our time. It concerns the relationship of the individual to society. The individual has become more conscious than ever of his dependence upon society, but he does not experience this dependence as a positive asset, as an organic tie, as a protective force, but rather as a threat to his natural rights, or even to his economic existence. Moreover, his position in society is such that the egotistical drives of his makeup are constantly being accentuated, while his social drives, which are by nature weaker, progressively deteriorate. All human beings, whatever their position in society, are suffering from this process of deterioration. Unknowingly prisoners of their own egotism, they feel insecure, lonely, and deprived of the naive, simple, and unsophisticated enjoyment of life. Man can find meaning in life, short and perilous as it is, only through devoting himself to society. The economic anarchy of capitalist society as it exists today is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil. We see before us a huge community of producers, the members of which are unceasingly striving to deprive each other of the fruits of their collective labor, not by force, but on the whole in faithful compliance with legally established rules.
There you go, folks. Einstein said it. Capitalism bad. Confirmed. Sorry, let me get back in my role. So we have this coercive economic system where owners pay workers in amounts not commensurate with the value of their labor, but instead as little as they can get away with, because that's how you make money through owning stuff. And what ends up happening in a system like this is that competition and increases in productivity that might otherwise help humanity just concentrate money and power among the few owners. To make matters worse, people with money and power can use their money and power to influence politics, meaning even in a democracy, we don't really have any way to check their exponentially increasing money and power. And most of us don't even know this is going on because the owners also control the media and education. We wastefully produce things on the basis of what is profitable and not what is valuable. Inevitable economic depressions drive poverty and unemployment, and all the new technologies that are supposed to make our lives easier just make the problem worse. And worst of all, it makes us all sad and hate each other, when we should be helping each other and feeling fulfilled by that interdependence. In my opinion, there's only one solution. Socialism, of course. We need a planned economy that would meet everyone's needs, but somehow not allow whatever centralized power structure to get too authoritarian. If we want to fix society, we're going to have to figure out how to implement such an economy. And since this whole McCarthyism thing is making talking about socialism difficult, I think this magazine will be helpful. And that is Einstein's Why Socialism. Thank you. While reading it, a few of the points he made stood out to me as in tension with what one might expect from a brilliant physicist who's basically the poster boy for detached objective genius. Besides him being a bleeding heart anti-capitalist who wanted us all to work together, I mean. For one, he was very clear in his understanding that physics is not a useful methodology for solving social issues.
Science, however, cannot create ends, and even less instill them in human beings. Science, at most, can supply the means by which to attain certain ends. We should be on our guard not to overestimate science and scientific methods when it is a question of human problems.
This was a refreshing thing to hear from a physicist, who are sometimes known to assume that their understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe extends to everything within it. It's cute. Einstein even jokes at one point saying he has feelings to tell you about, and he's sorry, but they can't be expressed in equations. He also had a keen understanding of how things like technology and school are inherently political.
Our whole education system suffers from the evils of capitalism. I am convinced there is only one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely, through the establishment of a socialist economy accompanied by an educational system which would be oriented towards social goals.
I've spoken in a video before about how education for things like physics, engineering, and computer science in the United States are massively political, despite many educators believing it's not. So Einstein's recognition that education supports the capitalist power structure not only challenges that common belief, but advocates for a particular political ideology that should inform it, which is kinda wild. Finally, Einstein was surprisingly hopeful about the future of humanity. And I say surprisingly because in internet culture, being a doomer is simply the way big-brained people who understand how irrevocably screwed the world is would logically react to the state of things, of course. Instead, Einstein used anthropological studies of primitive cultures as evidence that there are different ways that humans can successfully choose to organize themselves.
It is on such cultures that those who are striving to improve the lot of man may ground their hopes. Human beings are not condemned, because of their biological constitution, to annihilate each other or to be at the mercy of a cruel, self-inflicted fate.
So to the guys who left comments on my video about colonialism and astronomy, very logically explaining to me that conquest and exploitation are simply the inevitable outcomes of humanity's evolved intelligence, and a good thing actually, maybe take a leaf from the book of the man whose name is literally shorthand for genius. Sorry, am I getting emotional? My apologies. Unfortunate that I couldn't communicate my feelings through math. All these things, Einstein's humility around physics, his political motivatedness, his optimism for our species, all of this stands in such stark contrast to the type of person that comes to mind, to me at least, when someone says physicist. It feels to me very far removed from the kind of person I've known to revere Einstein as this bastion of pure intellect, unsoiled by the foolish subjectivities of us normals. But as fun as I do think that contrast is, the thing that most stuck with me while reading this essay was actually the introductory bit that I skipped over in my recap.
Is it advisable for one who is not an expert on economic and social issues to express views on the subject of socialism?
He says yes, positing that because the field of economics is based on this arguably temporary predatory phase of humanity and is therefore unequipped to evaluate a system that aims to move us past such a phase, economists are not inherently more authoritative than anyone else on the topic of socialism. Which, sure, great, but then he does this thing where he breaks down methodological similarities and differences between astronomy and economics, and like I said earlier, he ultimately lands on the point that the factors involved in economic models are far more complex than those in, say, stellar evolution models or whatever, and physics brain is therefore not a useful approach for social issues. But if that's the case, why did he do this? Why did Albert Einstein, The renowned physicist who did not believe physics nor a disposition for it to be useful tools in solving economic or social problems cared to publish an essay about socialism. It's not like he came up with anything new. As cogent as the piece is, it's just a milquetoast recap of Marx's greatest hits. And it's not like he wanted to hear himself talk or something. Einstein was known to be pretty uncomfortable with his fame. If anything, he knew from his time in Germany what can happen if someone's too outspoken about the current right-wing political order. So if this humble physicist had nothing unique to contribute to a conversation that he himself said his prodigious expertise cannot inform, why would he bother to so publicly announce his alignment with socialism at a time when doing exactly that was practically labeling oneself as an enemy of the state? To understand his foray into politics, I want to put Einstein's essay in conversation with the scholarship of another physicist YouTuber, Dr. Angela Collier's video, Billionaires Want You to Know They Could Have Done Physics. It centers a fascinating observation. Celebrity tech billionaires, your Mark Zuckerberg, your Elon Musk, your Bills' Gateses, all the innovation guys really, they love talking about how they almost did physics.
Because physics attempts to understand the truth of the universe.
Auditing a lot of courses at Harvard that I wasn't even signed up for.
I went to Princeton primarily because I wanted to study physics, quantum mechanics.
Do you want to just talk for a bit about what's going on with the James Webb Telescope?
And it's very specifically physics. That's important. As a note, physics is a thing one does and not a vibe one embodies, and none of these billionaires actually do or have done physics. If they wanted to, they certainly could. With $1 billion, you could just pay some people to teach you and publish research with you, and then you'll be a physicist. But instead of doing that, they just wax poetic about their scientific careers that could have been. Or in the case of Elon Musk, straight up lie about your credentials and post intro mechanics problem sets as if it's some kind of intellectual flex.
There's no need even to have a college degree.
Here's how Angela explains this weird and specific fixation.
These billionaires who claim to be like, I used to be into physics, I'm so into physics, are public billionaires. They really care about their public perception, and they don't want to be seen as like the evil billionaire who exploited the workforce and destroyed the planet, right? And instead, they think, hey, I'm not evil, guys. I'm just like really smart. And because I'm so smart, I was able to make $1 billion. And the reason you didn't make $1 billion is because, unlike me, you're not as smart. I'm really smart. The only thing stopping you from having the $1 billion is if you were smart. Hey, I'm really smart. I thought I could do physics one time. I didn't do that, but the fact that I thought about it makes me really smart, which is evidenced by the billions of dollars I have.
Bars. So billionaires are constantly telling the public how physicsy they are in an effort to make themselves seem like geniuses in a meritocratic system who deserve their success, and not oligarchs with deeply depraved business practices. And this kind of works because a lot of people mistakenly perceive physics as so uniquely difficult that anyone who understands it must be a genius in general. It's like nerd clout. You give someone the impression that you understand complicated things about the laws of the universe, and they might believe you're just really smart at everything. Let's call it proximity to physics, the phenomenon by which someone's association with physics, whether genuine or superficial, grants them unearned credibility in domains beyond physics. And this is where we get back to Einstein, because I think he understood this just as well as today's public billionaires. If I were to guess, I'd say that Einstein wrote Why Socialism for the same reason the tech daddies spend so much time reminiscing about their youthful dreams of pondering particles. Because he knew that clout as a brilliant physicist would automatically lend authority to whatever he said. Their motivations are different, to be sure, as are their actual relationships to the subject. But Einstein and the billionaires both tapped into the same weird social capital that their proximity to physics grants them to do and speak on things that aren't informed by physics. The significance of Why Socialism wasn't Einstein's insightful commentary on economic systems or something. It was that commentary coming with the intellectual gravity of the man who so famously revolutionized how we think reality works. Pun absolutely intended. Let's check in on that Angela Collier video again. I do recommend you watch it because she takes her thesis in some interesting directions, including a hilarious aside about how she read Atlas Shrugged and loved it, thinking it was satire. Honestly, the whole thing was very informative and fun. But there is one place where I somewhat disagree with her. Actually, that's not true. I don't buy this line either.
No physicist would ever think that they're smarter than a biologist or a paleontologist or literally any human with any job.
Really? You don't know any physicists like that? None. I don't believe you. But as for my actual point of tension, here's her conclusion to the video.
I just think we as a society should agree to stop falling for this. Like, there are no lone geniuses. Science and technology and, building things like iPhones and rockets are collaborative things that require the expertise of hundreds of people. Steve Jobs cannot go back in time and build an iPhone. What are you talking about? Just because he says, I thought about doing physics one time, you think he's a genius? We have to stop falling for this.
So let's do a yes and. Yes, we as a society have this belief that our progress is thanks to the singular effort of lone geniuses, and proximity to physics can leverage that belief. Yes, I think both of those things are bad things. Progress is driven not by just the brilliance of individuals, but by the collective efforts of many. And being good at physics doesn't make you smart at everything. I think these are biases in our collective thinking that serve systems of power, and we should endeavor to correct them. We should stop falling for it. Yes. And given that this is a feature of the society we live in, and changing such a deeply ingrained feature will take time, I think people who have proximity to physics should use it to undermine hegemonic power structures. Because that is what Einstein was doing when he wrote Why Socialism, right? He was leveraging his proximity to physics to amplify the ideas of people challenging oppressive institutions. Einstein wrote this essay because he knew, just as well as you know, just as well as I know, that there are a lot of people out there who would only find the words of Marx compelling if a super genius physicist was the one saying them. The difference between Einstein and the billionaires is that Einstein used his proximity to physics for good and not to rationalize his attempt at world domination. And it's something he did a lot, by the way. Despite this aspect of his legacy being pretty aggressively whitewashed, Einstein was an extremely political dude. There was the socialism, of course. He was so vocal about it that the FBI suspected he was a communist spy and had a 1,500-page file on him. But he was also a very active ally to the African-American civil rights movement once he came to the US. He gave speeches condemning American white supremacy, advocated for the legal rights of black men falsely accused of SA, and even offered personal refuge for racistly blacklisted figures in his own home. He was also a proponent of nuclear disarmament later in life, which was a significant shift from his early career support for an American nuclear project. He also said gay rights and aspired to be vegetarian. I was honestly really surprised to learn while researching this video, not just how outspoken he was about social issues, but also how his takes were all quite progressive, even by today's standards. And no one knows about it. I studied physics for 10 years, in which time I heard a whole lot about Einstein, trust, but never anything about his politics. I can't say it doesn't make sense, though. His god-tier proximity to physics means that a lot of people would likely be inspired to follow his lead if they found out that the smartest guy ever was such a radical. So it makes sense that, to whatever extent they can, the power structures that Einstein fought against would work to hide that fact. It's like how MLK is portrayed as this guy who just wanted little black kids and little white kids to get along, and not a vehement critic of American militarism and capitalism who advocated for radical systemic change. If a revolutionary is too significant to suppress, the powers that be will just rebrand them. So despite popular perception, Einstein spent a lot of time championing social causes he cared about. And I think we, meaning those of us who have proximity to physics and humane politics, should endeavor to do the same. In that spirit, I'm going to take us on a little side quest. Don't worry, I'll tie it back to the socialism in the end, but first,
I want to unpack what is perhaps the spiciest and most topical of Einstein's politics. So to get to where I'm trying to go, we need to build up some context about Einstein's experiences. In case you weren't already aware, Einstein was Jewish. He grew up in a secular family and didn't believe in God in the traditional sense, but he did strongly identify with Jewish cultural tradition. He referred to himself as a deeply religious non-believer, which, like, I get. Honestly, I should use that line. Start establishing my plausible deniability for the inevitable Muslim registry. He pinpoints the most resonant aspects of this tradition in his 1934 autobiography, Mein Weltbild, saying,
"The pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, an almost fanatical love of justice. These are features of the Jewish tradition, which make me thank my lucky stars that I belong to it."
These two elements, a thirst for learning and a duty towards humanity, are values Einstein espoused across his writings. His 1938 essay, Why Do They Hate the Jews, for example, included a beautiful elaboration of how they've shaped a lineage that he is clearly proud to be a part of.
The bond that has united the Jews for thousands of years and that unites them today is, above all, the democratic ideal of social justice, coupled with the ideal of mutual aid and tolerance among all men. Personalities such as Moses, Spinoza, and Karl Marx, dissimilar as they may be, all lived and sacrificed themselves for the ideal of social justice, and it was the tradition of their forefathers that led them on this thorny path. The second characteristic trait of Jewish tradition is the high regard in which it holds every form of intellectual aspiration. This is not due to any special wealth of endowment, but to the fact that the esteem in which intellectual accomplishment is held among the Jews creates an atmosphere particularly favorable to the development of any talents that may exist. At the same time, a strong critical spirit prevents blind obeisance to any mortal authority.
I really love this context for, like, Albert Einstein, the man. He clearly saw his identities as both a physicist and a politically engaged person as deeply intertwined. They were both expressions of his cultural Judaism, not distinct compartments of his life that came from nowhere. Unfortunately, the early 20th century was not a great time to be a social justice-loving Jewish physicist in Germany. Following the recognition of his field-revolutionizing publications and coincident establishment of the Nationalist Socialist Party, Einstein's rise to celebrity status in the 1920s made him a highly visible target for anti-Semitic propaganda. He was vilified in the media as a symbol of scientific degeneracy, and his papers were among those ritualistically burned by the Nazis. But it's important to note that this defamation didn't just come from random bigots. It was initiated by his own peers. Philip Leonard and Johannes Stark were two physicists who separately won Nobel Prizes and then didn't have anything better to do with their lives than orchestrate a years-long assault on not just Einstein, but Jewish physicists in general. They published a whole thesis about how Jewish thought is contaminating the objective perfection that is Aryan physics, positing that physics produced by Jews was abstract and detached from reality, unlike the highly empirical, common sense, and just generally bias-free methodology of true German science. And according to them, the only times Jewish physicists ever did contribute anything of value, it was because they stole their results from Aryans, of course. Completely unrelated to both Leonard and Stark constantly bitching about Einstein ripping off their work, I'm sure. These ideas were the basis of the many, many public lectures they gave about how relativity was just the nonsense ravings of Jewish subjectivities. Not that they had any basis on which to make such a claim, but again, that proximity to physics will have guys like this just saying whatever they want with the authority of an expert, cause forces, I don't know, particles, fields. They also used their material power as scientists to serve their anti-Semitic agenda. Eventually, Leonard was high up enough in the field to defund theoretical research nationally, which at the time referred to general relativity, Einstein's thing, and quantum mechanics, which famously had a weirdly high concentration of Jews among its seminal figures. So between growing anti-Semitic sentiment in German society, the extensive harassment from his own colleagues, and a lot of very public beef with Hitler himself, Einstein eventually left Germany. Sorry guys, he's ours now. Tut mir viel leid. I have no more right to be proud of where I'm from than a German. And while he was certainly safer in his new home in America, the experience of bigotry in his professional life wasn't over. In a recently unearthed 1936 letter, Einstein described the more understated but still very prevalent anti-Semitism he experienced while working at Princeton.
There exists here a tremendous anti-Semitism, especially in academia. Mind you, this never takes the form of brutal speech or action, but rather it brews all the more intensely under the surface. It is, so to speak, an omnipresent enemy, one that is impossible to see, whose presence you only perceive.
He gave examples of this subtle discrimination, describing how his colleagues would never inform him of open positions, even within his own specialty, and how his assistant of 2 years had to move to Russia for a job because no one in the States would hire him. And this is Einstein we're talking about. They professionally iced out Einstein after relativity was confirmed. I know this doesn't sound as pressing a matter as, like, the rise of the literal Nazi party, and it's not. But this kind of anti-networking, let's call it, is how bigotry often functions to exclude marginalized people in science and academia. You don't actively harass them anymore. That would look bad. Instead, you just choose not to extend to them the opportunities and connections that you would extend to someone otherwise. And this absolutely still happens. I've not been able to find anything I can cite to this effect, but Einstein's account of being left out of professional opportunities on the basis of ambiguous anti-Semitism is pretty consistent with what I've heard from some Jewish colleagues while I was still working in astrophysics. Anti-Semitism, like any other kind of bigotry that exists in broader society, exists in physics too. And also like any other kind of bigotry, people who are invested in the advancement of physics should also be invested in challenging it. There's a strong case to be made that the exclusion of people from marginalized groups in a discipline stymies that discipline's progress. Here's a paper to that effect if you want a full argument, but I think the contributions of Jewish physicists is actually one of the best examples of this. Like, do you really think it's a coincidence that both relativity and quantum mechanics, the two undeniable revolutions from the last century of the field, both came largely from a population that was marginalized in the society it came up in? It's like what Einstein said about the Jews' strong critical spirit that prevents blind obeisance to any mortal authority. Who better to look in the face of hundreds of years of scientific tradition and just go, but what if you're all wrong and it was actually this instead? Who better to challenge what authority tells them is right than the people who have been told by that same authority that their very existence is wrong? I want to talk more about pedagogy of the oppressed, but there is a more pressing direction I have to take this in. And it's not a fun one. So looking at the summation of his experiences, it should come as no surprise that Einstein was an ardent supporter of Zionism, a movement that sought to establish, and today seeks to maintain, a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. His rationale is exactly what you would expect considering his circumstances.
The Jewish people alone has for centuries been in the anomalous position of being victimized and hounded as a people, though bereft of all the rights and protections which even the smallest people normally has. The advent of Hitler underscored with a savage logic all the disastrous implications contained in the abnormal situation in which Jews found themselves. Millions of Jews perished because there was no spot on the globe where they could find sanctuary. The Jewish survivors demand the right to dwell amid brothers on the ancient soil of their fathers.
So throughout his career, Einstein gave public lectures about the value of Zionism, supported fundraising efforts for Jewish settlements in Palestine, and established significant professional relationships with Israeli universities. But, at the risk of sounding like a colonial sympathizer, I think his Zionism was nuanced, let's say. For one, Einstein was a proponent of labor Zionism, which, while still not completely morally sound in my opinion, is a very different beast than the political Zionism from which today's ruling party in Israel derives. While early political Zionism proposed relying on a foreign power like the UK to forcefully establish and protect a Jewish state in Palestine, which they did, labor Zionists were socialists who believed the Jewish working class should just set up some kibbutzim and make a state that way. However, Einstein differed from even most labor Zionists in his opposition to a Jewish state, regardless of how it was established.
My awareness of the essential nature of Judaism resists the idea of a Jewish state with borders, an army, and a measure of temporal power, no matter how modest. I am afraid of the inner damage Judaism will sustain, especially from the development of a narrow nationalism within our own ranks, against which we have already had to fight without a Jewish state. A return to a nation in the political sense of the word would be equivalent to turning away from the spiritualization of our community, which we owe to the genius of our prophets.
So Einstein was adamant that, while a homeland in Palestine was the right of the Jews, the only way to actually have it would be for them to migrate and live peacefully among their Palestinian neighbors. Unfortunately, the UN did eventually vote to partition Palestine, and ever a man of his values, Einstein began to be more outspoken about the nascent Zionist state. When he was asked in 1948 to write a letter for the Haganah, a Zionist paramilitary organization that had been escalating its years-long campaign of terror attacks on non-Jewish Palestinians, he responded with one of his most chilling writings on the subject.
When a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it, the terrorist organizations built up from our own ranks. I am not willing to see anybody associated with those misled and criminal people.
Later that year, when American politicians were expecting a visit from Menachem Begin, the founder of Israel's currently in power Likud party, Einstein wrote a letter to the New York Times with a group of other Jewish intellectuals protesting the visit, saying,
"It is inconceivable that those who oppose fascism throughout the world, if correctly informed as to Mr. Begin's political record and perspectives, could add their names and support to the movement he represents."
And in 1952, when the first president of Israel died and Einstein was asked to succeed him, because that's a thing that happened, Einstein declined, citing, among other reasons,
I would have to say to the Israeli people things they would not like to hear.
To be fair, apparently Ben-Gurion didn't really want to offer him the position, but he did, and can you imagine that timeline? Now, I want to be careful when ascribing intention or beliefs to people I don't really have the ability to speak for, but I think it's reasonable to conclude that Einstein, while sympathetic to the idea of a Jewish homeland for obvious reasons, understood that the nation of Israel is a fascist state whose maintenance would necessitate a brutality that is antithetical to his sense of Jewish values. That said, I'm not fully sure what to make of his position exactly. Do we say he was a pro-Palestine Zionist? Is it that he's not quite a Zionist, but calling him explicitly pro-Palestine is giving him too much credit? I don't know, and to be honest, I don't think making some kind of judgment about his political identity or its righteousness would be all that useful an exercise. Instead, I want to offer us a little thought experiment in the spirit of our buddy who got so much out of them. A Gedankenexperiment, if you will. That's how I do a German accent. Just say whatever and then go, So much hate on the Germans in this one. I mean, for obvious reasons. Given what we know about Einstein now, his outspokenness about his political beliefs, his activism for marginalized communities other than his own, his first-hand experiences with fascism, and of course, his critical stance on the Zionist project in Palestine, what do you think he would have done in the last year? Pretend it's 2025 and he's still somehow alive, still working at Princeton, still trying to get his unified field theory to work. How do you think he would have reacted to what we've seen unfold in Gaza since October 7th? If he were here today, what would he do now? I'm not sure I can answer that. I didn't know the guy. But I do have an idea of how a
similarly politically principled physicist might engage with the current moment. And to illustrate that, I'm going to do the same thing I did almost a year ago, and that is hard pivot this video into a shameless plug for Palestinian solidarity. But don't worry, it's actually about physics this time. I'm gonna tie it all back to the socialism stuff, bring it all full circle. It'll be very satisfying, not contrived feeling at all. So I'm not going to get into the full history of Zionist aggression on Palestinians right now. I already shoehorned that into last year's video that was otherwise about telescopes in Hawaii. Instead, I want to talk about the state of Palestinian physics. This is gonna be pretty sad for a minute, but if you know my work, then you know I will at least try to give you something to do with those sad feelings, so just hold tight. Here's a term I've never had to know about before: scholasticide. It refers to the systematic destruction of a people's education. The American Historical Association recently passed a resolution to oppose scholasticide in Gaza, citing the US-funded IDF campaign that has, quote, effectively obliterated Gaza's education system. The resolution referenced a UN report from last April that recounted just some of the damage.
After 6 months of military assault, more than 5,479 students, 261 teachers, and 95 university professors have been killed in Gaza. At least 60% of educational facilities, including 13 public libraries, have been damaged or destroyed, and at least 625,000 students have no access to education. Isra University, the last remaining university in Gaza, was demolished by the Israeli military on 17 January 2024.
So there are effectively no universities left in Gaza. And that has made it very hard for Palestinians there to do physics, because Palestinian physicists exist. And I have some first-hand perspectives from a few of them that I'd like to share with you now. The first is from a piece by a Palestinian physicist and writer based in Gaza, Qasim Walid, for the Electronic Intifada, titled "The Physics of Death in Gaza."
I realize that physics in Gaza is different. Physics taught me how to accurately calculate the velocity of a rocket as it hits the ground, but it didn't teach me how to calculate the fallout if that rocket targeted my house. Physics taught me that the density of an object is less than that of water. It will float on the surface, like aid boxes dropped from planes. It didn't teach me that people might drown trying to reach that aid. Do the classical laws of motion apply to Gaza, where the current Israeli genocidal war advances in a certain path at absolute time and space, or has the uncertainty principle overcome the Palestinian question and eradicated the concept of trajectory? Why do I feel like I've aged 20 years since October 2023, when on Earth time dilation cannot be that significant? Now that I've raised these questions, I've opened new gates that I can't close. Life is different now that Israel has killed my professors. Knowledge feels trapped behind unopenable gates. My professors taught me the physics of life. Israel, on the other hand, is forcing me to learn the physics of death.
The lost professors that Walid refers to are many. In this piece, he spoke mostly of Khitam al-Wazifa and Sufyan Tayyeh, two accomplished physicists and educators who were killed along with their families by Israeli airstrikes. Tayyeh was additionally an internationally acclaimed researcher and president of the Islamic University in Gaza. I was recently connected to a student who was studying in his department named Wasim, and he sent me a voice memo to share with my audience.
Hello everyone, I am Wasim, a third-year physics student at the Islamic University of Gaza. I have always been patient about science and understanding this vast universe. Every moment of my day was spent chasing my dream, the dream of uncovering the mysteries of existence, understanding everything from the atoms to the galaxies. But then the war came and my life was turned upside down. My priorities shifted overnight. Solving complex physics equations was replaced by the daily struggle to provide water and food for my family. The harshness of life has worn me down. I once dreamed of changing the world, but now I feel like burden on it. Still, I refuse to give up on my dream. But today I stand powerless in the face of my circumstances.
So I'm going to be real with y'all for a second. I know it's hard to keep hearing these stories. Staying tuned in to what's been happening in Gaza weighs on you. Not to act like us bystanders are experiencing even a fraction of what Palestinians have gone through, of course, but witnessing a genocide for months on end is legitimately harmful to one's psyche. That's why people avoid it. That's why activism burnout is a thing. It's hard to keep looking this shit in the face. The energy we had in the first few months of protest has shifted, and a sense of weariness and fatigue has settled in for many of us. And now we have this recent ceasefire announcement, which may or may not actually be the end of this wave of senseless violence, and of course, does not preclude the initiation of another round of senseless violence a few years down the line, as has been the pattern. But regardless of what happens next, right now, Gaza is in shambles. And right now, its people need help rebuilding the damage our tax dollars wrought on their home for our benefit. There are many different avenues to contribute to this effort, but like I've explained in another video, I personally believe that a big part of sustainably supporting whatever social movements you care about is identifying the places where that issue naturally occurs in your life. The way a teacher can help is different than the way a doctor can help, is different than the way a small business owner can help. And I don't know what that help will look like for most people, but if you're a physicist, scientist, or academic in general, I got you. To anyone else, take this as an example of what I mean by finding your specific way to help. Actually, let's turn this into a prompt for y'all. New viewers, sometimes I give my audience a question to discuss in the comment section, and then I share interesting things people said in the next video. So today, let's do that by collectively ideating on this concept of solidarity in your daily life. It might help to finish watching this section first to see what I mean by finding ways the positions you already occupy can be leveraged to support whatever it is you care about. But once you do, see if you can come up with a similar example in your own life. Given some position you hold, like a job or a role in some community, see if you can think of a way, however minor, to contribute to a social cause that you're invested in from that position. You don't even have to actually do it. Maybe it'll stick in your mind until the right opportunity comes up. Maybe someone else will read your comment and be inspired to act by your idea. Right now, I just want us to play the game of imagining. So yeah, leave a comment with the keywords discussion prompt in it, and I will share some of your imaginings at the end of my next video. But back to my pitch. So I already talked about the BDS academic boycott last year when I was talking about Palestinian solidarity in general, and if you're not familiar with that, I'd say it's a worthwhile thing to go learn about. But while I think it is valuable for us to withhold our participation from Israeli educational institutions to protest their role in maintaining a colonial project, it's also important that we do what we can to protect and elevate Palestinian students and scholars. Pushing back on imperialism is one part of the fight, yes, but building up the victims when they've taken losses is also a part of that same fight. And there are actually a lot of ways for us here in our bougie American institutions of higher education to build up our Palestinian contemporaries. I recently had a conversation with Dr. Haynes Miller, a professor of mathematics at MIT, about his involvement in projects supporting Palestinian scientists and students, and wow, has he set a high bar. He's taken advantage of his position as a nearly retired faculty member at a well-resourced institution to push for a range of projects, from offering free distance learning courses to university students stuck in Gaza or displaced to Cairo, directing a program offering paid remote research positions and mentorship to Palestinian undergrads, and expanding a fellowship program that was initially established to bring at-risk scholars in from the Ukraine to include Palestinians as well. I was honestly quite surprised to see the range of really meaningful and explicitly pro-Palestine efforts MIT was engaged in. But according to Dr. Miller, these kinds of projects are more politically viable a thing than you'd think.
The administrations are constrained by politics to strike a certain posture, but then you scratch the surface and you talk to people about constructive things that can be done. We're not talking about attacking complicity of MIT researchers with Ministry of Defense in Israel. That's an issue, but it's not the issue we're talking about. We're talking about providing education, which is what we do, and research opportunities, which is what we do for these students who happen to be in Palestine. You find a lot of support for that, a real eagerness to support that kind of activity.
I highly recommend anyone interested in learning more about the ways that we can materially support Palestinian science check out Dr. Miller's personal website. I've linked it in the video references, and he has information on all those different projects and more. The organizations Scientists for Palestine, Students for Justice in Palestine, and the Faculty for Justice in Palestine Network are other resources I direct interested parties to learn more about supporting Palestinian science, because ultimately, I can't give tailor-made instructions that work for everyone. Finding your own role is part of the work. So learn what you can, look at what power is available to you, and leverage it to the best of your ability. If you're a faculty member, particularly a more senior or a tenure track one with more job security, try getting involved in or starting up initiatives like those at MIT, offering virtual classes or mentoring, hiring remote researchers, sponsoring scholars to come spend time at your institution. These are all things that are very within the sphere of influence for university professors who control grants. If you're a more junior kind of person who might not have that sort of power yet, undergrads, grad students, postdocs, organize with each other and try to lobby the more powerful people in your department to invest in these kinds of projects. And if you're just a person who likes physics casually and that's what brought you to my channel, please go donate something to Wasim's GoFundMe and support at least one aspiring Palestinian physicist and his family. He's trying to move to Germany so he can continue his education, and you have the ability to help him do that.
All I wish for is to complete my education, to reach my dream I have carried since childhood. I have launched a fundraising campaign to make this dream possible. Your little can mean the world to me. Thank you from the depths of my heart.
Imagine how much it could do if even a fraction of the people who watch this video go donate a few dollars. And I hope that doesn't make it seem like this is a charity case or something, because that's not what it is. It's about building our singular international scientific community, a community of which Palestinian scientists are a valuable part.
One thing to know about Palestine is that it's the most highly educated Arabic-speaking country, I think. And that's especially true in Gaza because the unemployment rate is astronomical. And what do? If you're unemployed? You go to school and you value education. You see that all over the world. There's a tremendous talent pool there. It's very, very creative, very entrepreneurial, and operating under amazingly difficult conditions. There's one scientific establishment in the world, and the Palestinian scientists are part of that just as much as we are here at MIT.
Physics, like any science, is a global community. There is one massive collective endeavor we are all doing as a species to understand the fundamental laws of nature, like a cosmic group project. And the constant bombing of Gaza over the last 16 months, the devastating incapacitation of our group members has materially damaged that collective endeavor. And even if my whole one world science feels like hippy-dippy bullshit and you subscribe to more of a lone wolves who progress science narrative rather than appreciating the compounding effects of increased scientific collaboration, surely you can recognize that the people who progress physics can come from anywhere, right? If you really wanted to advance physics and you don't just say that to justify being a dick to marginalized communities, then you should be so invested in all people having the opportunity to do it, so we can statistically maximize our probability of identifying those super special mega geniuses. To bring it back to our boy, Einstein literally came to the US as a refugee, fleeing a genocide of his people. And he was able to do that because of academic opportunities physicists here offered him. What the people at Princeton who gave him a position did is not dissimilar to what people like Haynes Miller are doing for Palestinian scholars today. And while it seems easy in hindsight to justify doing this for someone like Einstein because it was Einstein, what if his physics career had been delayed by like 10, 15 years? What if the only difference between Einstein and the late Dr. Sufyan Tayyeh is which side of those 10 or 15 years they found themselves on when the local authoritarian decided to exterminate their people? However you look at it, the violent legacy of Zionism that Einstein so presciently saw coming has severely damaged the Palestinian component of our international physics community. And it is imperative upon us physicists to help heal it. It's so fucking wild to me that some people will sincerely say it's stifling scientific progress when Native Hawaiians protest the building of yet another massive telescope on Mauna Kea, but not when Israel systematically destroys the entirety of Palestinian higher education. Is it because they're more concerned with white people having their big space toys than actually furthering humanity's collective knowledge as effectively as possible?
حدثوني
So returning to our Gedankenexperiment, what would Einstein do if he were alive today? I mean, besides maybe immigrating again, because the current moment in the US is not like 1933 Germany, but saying he hypothetically stuck around, I find it very hard to imagine a version of him that wouldn't still be wielding his scientific gravitas against the rising tides of fascism, both here in the States and over in Palestine. At the heart of his politics, Einstein was an internationalist. He was deeply invested in the well-being of humanity around the globe and opposed nationalism in all its forms. And as much as some people will protest the comparison, the ideologies of Nazis and political Zionists both exemplify the palingenetic ultranationalism that Roger Griffin used to characterize what it actually means to be fascist. That's why being pro-Palestine doesn't contradict being in solidarity with victims of anti-Semitism. It's actually ideologically consistent. In the US, the mainstream narrative has always been that opposing the colonization of Palestine is inherently anti-Semitic. Not because it's true, but because that belief deteriorates solidarity between two groups that are both the victims of fascism. It's like when union busters would stoke racial divides between workers to break their collective power. Turns out, pitting marginalized groups against each other is a great way to stop them from organizing against a common enemy. And you know what's a great lens for seeing past the superficial divisions imposed on us to our detriment? Socialism. I'm convinced that Einstein's internationalist socialist perspective was the unifying thread between the rest of his political stances. His orientation towards the welfare and unity of all people, regardless of national boundaries, clearly informed his compassion for the plight of both the Jews and the Palestinians, as well as Black people and the gays and animals and, you know, just living beings in general. Not to say that socialism is just generally equivalent with moral goodness or something, but like, as a political ideology, it's not a bad place to start resolving some of the more inhumane contradictions of our current social order. I've recommended this book before, but for anyone who wants to learn more about the relationships between socialism, Jewish history, and Palestinian liberation, of which there are many, it turns out, please check out A Socialist Introduction to Palestine. It's very informative, a pretty easy read, and you can get it for free in my references. And as cute as it is that I've managed to tie all the disparate aspects of Einstein's political writings into a neat little package here, there's still a bigger takeaway that I want y'all to leave with than what some smart guys' opinions were. Let's take a moment to remember that concurrent to all his political activities, Einstein was still doing physics. I mean, he wasn't releasing banger after banger anymore like he was in the earlier parts of his career, but all his vocal support for socialism, his civil rights activism, his speaking out against Zionist fascism, all of that was happening while he was actively being a scientist, and sometimes specifically by capitalizing on that position. And in this moment, when our scientific community abroad is rebuilding after a siege of fascist violence, and when our scientific institutions here at home are being targeted by our very own fascist regime, I think that we, as scientists, researchers, academics, need to follow his example and step the fuck up. I'm not saying every single one of us needs to dedicate our lives to any one particular cause. There are many, many different heads on the hydra of human exploitation that need attention. But we can't just pretend like physicists are apolitical beings anymore, because they never were, and they sure as hell aren't now. Instead, I want us to start taking our political power seriously. Within our discipline, there is real potential to affect change in the world by working in solidarity with our international colleagues. And outside of our discipline, our words carry a potentially unearned but nonetheless real weight that we can lean into for causes we care about. Like Einstein did. Be like Einstein. I can't say I endorse every single one of his beliefs, but at the end of the day, the man really cared about people. He had genuine hope for a better future, and concurrent to his scientific career, took it upon himself to push us towards it. His commitment to humanity was a beautiful example of tikkun olam, a central tenet of Judaism that translates to heal the world. I learned this phrase last year from Jewish friends of mine I've been organizing for Palestine with. Friends who have given me real-life examples of people holding that same complexity as Einstein in their politics. And as someone who quite literally made my scientific career studying the gravitationally bananas objects and events that Einstein predicted, at this point in my life, I sincerely find the political parts of his legacy way more inspiring than the scientific parts. Or at least the combination. I am so heartened to have such a powerful example of someone that shows how we can care about our research and discover incredible things and do awesome science and uncover the nature of reality. And at the same time, we can give a shit about each other and put in effort to heal the world. To whatever degree I can still call myself a scientist, I aspire to be the kind that intentionally exists as a political being, and not the kind that appeals to an abstracted, apolitical objectivity to wash my hands of any obligation to society within my vocation. And I get that it's easy to feel like the overwhelming scale of social systems is just too enormous for any one of us to have any real kind of impact. Or perhaps if you're a physicist who overcorrected, to feel like contemplating the boundless universe makes the struggles on Earth seem insignificant in the cosmically grand scheme of things. But we have to remember that even in the face of all that scale and complexity, we are the systems, and our actions create the world we inhabit. A world that matters to us, and a world that can, with effort, one day be better. I know that. Einstein knew that. Do you? Hello, and welcome to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I was considering using this little outro to talk about some of Einstein's actual science, especially because it relates so closely to what I used to work on. But I still owe you the comment responses from 2 videos ago, so I'm going to do that. If you're curious to hear more about that, subscribe to the channel, because once I reach 100,000 subs, which I'm almost at, I'm gonna make a video where I explain my thesis work and just talk about the science that I did. And while you're at it, you can like the video, leave a comment on the video, share the video. All of this stuff does a lot to support me in the algorithm, and that just helps my bottom line. If you're feeling a bit more generous, first I would direct you to Wasim's fundraising campaign, because that's pretty urgent, but if you've done that and still have a few dollars to spare, consider supporting my work on Patreon. Patreon is how I fund this work because making these videos takes a lot of time and is kind of my main gig these days. All the names you see going by on the screen right now are the people who've signed up for my Patreon. They all donate a few dollars a month, starting at like $3 a month to support my work. And they're all really wonderful and I appreciate them a lot. There's a whole bunch of perks on the Patreon. I do these little Q&As where members ask me questions and I record these little videos answering them every once in a while. We have a book club where we read books about science and education. I also post interviews on the Patreon. The conversation I had with Haynes Miller for this video, the whole conversation is posted onto the Patreon, but sometimes I also just do little conversations with other creators for fun. So go check that out if you're interested in supporting me and participating in whatever little things I do there. And now I'm going to respond to the comments from 2 videos ago. So for those of you who don't follow the channel, a few months ago, I asked at the end of a video for my audience to critique my work, basically asking for feedback on anything I've posted on the channel at any point. And I got a whole bunch of really good feedback and I made a video responding to most of it. And in that video, I also said, if you want to respond back to my responses, you can leave a comment. So there's 3 points that I'm going to address from the responses to my responses to your critiques. So I'm gonna start with what to me feels like the most topical one. Like I mentioned in this video, last year I made a video about settler colonialism in Hawaii and Palestine, and I got a critique that basically said I was like unfairly representing Zionism. And you know, I responded to that in a way that felt appropriate to me at the time, and I've got 2 like diverging responses to it. So on the one hand, I got some people saying that I was still not being fair in my characterization of Zionism. And to be totally honest, I didn't find these responses particularly compelling, so I'm really not going to say anything about them. But on the other hand, I had some people saying I was being too sympathetic, and then I'm basically like a colonial sympathizer because I humored this person, and I wonder if like the defensiveness from that comment like came across in this video today. It probably did. And like, I get that. I don't necessarily disagree with the people who said that I could have been harsher or more straightforward in my response. However, as I was for the first Palestine video, as I was in that responding to critiques video, as I was even in this video, I am treading extremely fucking carefully when it comes to critiquing Zionism publicly because I am terrified of coming off as anti-Semitic. And that's partially because basically anything pro-Palestine is going to be construed as anti-Semitic, but it's also because I'm a publicly facing, visibly Arab person who talks about politics. You know, post 9/11, I think Arabs in America are already extremely reluctant to be publicly political, and for good reason. But also, it is just kind of a reality that part of the bigotry towards us is the assumption that we're anti-Semitic. And not to say there isn't a such thing as anti-Semitic Arabs, but anti-Semitism exists in literally all communities. All that to say, when I decide what to say publicly on a record that can't be erased, I am weighing both what I want to say and how I want to say it with my own literal safety. It's a line that I tread very carefully and very intentionally, and if you don't agree with it, make your own damn video and you know, risk your own safety. So the next set of responses to my response to a piece of criticism is regarding not a particular video or a particular point I made somewhere, but the fact that in general, I sometimes make little digs at white people and or men. And just to, you know, give some context, what these jokes usually are me pointing out a racialized or gendered social phenomenon that is harmful, but in a humorous way. And a couple people had said that they find those jokes alienating, and there's really no reason for me to be making jokes about people of any kind of identity regardless of like the context. And my response was basically, I don't care. I'm not interested in centering the feelings of white guys. I got a lot of pushback to this. I think out of everything I said in that video, this is the thing that most people responded to in the comments. I'm gonna kind of aggregate into 3 categories that I'll respond to in order of increasing me thinking it is valid. The first way people responded was basically saying, what if someone used the rationale you're using here, but for jokes about black people or jokes about women or jokes about whatever other group. And I can barely dignify that argument with a response. Like, that is a bad argument, because it is simply not the same thing to make a joke about people of a hegemonic identity as it is to make a joke about people of a minoritized identity. Those are just not equivalent. One of them challenges oppressive social structures, and one of them reinforces oppressive social structures. The second, and slightly more legitimate in my eyes, piece of pushback I got was kind of in response to me saying something like, well, in my own life, I have friends who are white people or men, and I make jokes like this around them, and they don't get offended because they feel like they're in on the joke. And some people said, that makes sense when you're actually talking to your friends, but we're not your friends, we're strangers on the internet, and so there isn't the established trust for you to be able to make jokes like that. And to that, I would say everything else about my delivery, my tone, my word choice, the references I make, the way I carry myself, just like everything about how I present myself and my ideas online is as if I was your friend. Like, I'm very much actively leaning into the parasocial nature of a video like this. That's why I'm not just like writing essays on Substack or something. There is value to acting like we have this kind of relationship, even if it's kind of artificial. I imagine there's like a lot of white guys who watch my videos that don't have a friend like me with whom they would have that kind of relationship, and this is me kind of giving a taste of that. Finally, what I think was the most compelling pushback I got on these jokes was people saying, okay, it's not the worst thing in the world that you make little jokes about white guys, but it does hurt, even if it's just a little bit. And if it hurts and you know that, why would you do it? Like, how hard is it to just not do it? And I think this sounds compelling if you don't understand what the value of these jokes are. There is value in people with minoritized identities talking shit amongst one another about the people who make their lives difficult. When I like make a joke about a shitty thing men often do, women feel validated because I am seeing their experience of pain, right? I'm allowed to prioritize the catharsis of minoritized people over the emotional comfort of white guys. Like, at the end of the day, if you find it so fucking alienating, you don't have to be here. If you're gonna consume the part of my soul I sacrifice to my work for free, you gotta contend with my reality. That's the cost. The price is that awareness, the price is that discomfort. And you can choose to pay that cost or not. It's your call. It's a free country. No, it's not. Okay, so we got the Zionism, we got the jokes about white guys. To end on a note that isn't so defensive, I wanted to respond to the person who made the Pluto critique. This was my favorite one because this was the one that really made me check myself. Basically, I had made this video about Pluto where I said some stuff, and then somebody was like, you're undermining your message with the way you're delivering it, basically. And they went into a lot more detail, and I read it and basically came to the conclusion that they were absolutely right. I actually talked a lot about the process of responding to that particular piece of feedback, because initially I was really defensive when I got it. I was like, oh, they don't understand what I'm trying to say, they don't get it, whatever. And then it took me like a couple days and like some calming down and some reflecting before I was like, they actually have a point. I do need to check myself. And I said as much in the video and thanked them for the feedback. And then they responded, and here's what they said. I was so thrilled that you engaged with my comment about Pluto, and then moments later horrified at how harsh some of what I said sounded, lol. So I had a mini meta version of your experience making the video. Sorry for going over the word limit, and thanks for taking up what I said anyway and leaving it a few days to form a response. So I think it's just really cute how we were both able to inspire this experience within one another. Like, in my opinion, that's just the best case scenario of critical exchange, right? Like, everybody comes out of it reflecting upon themselves and evolving in some way and learning from the other. And moving through that like defensiveness with like curiosity and openness rather than like pushing it away, right? Like in making that video and in my work in general, I generally try to embody and model the way I want you know, people to be, even if that's hard. And, you know, this is, I guess, the validation that that is, in fact, a valuable thing to do. But I just wanted to thank this person for, like, participating in this exchange with me. And I'm glad we both got something out of it. And in fact, I just want to thank everybody who kind of participated in this project, or whatever you want to call it, of like the criticism and the back and forth. You know, like I said, this is the end of that back and forth. I'm not gonna like draw it out any longer because I want to get back to talking about what people have to say about the actual topics of my videos. But, you know, I just want to throw out that I really do appreciate my viewers and what they have to say. Like, a lot of people seemed very surprised that I actually read their comments and responded to them and took them seriously, which I guess makes sense. Like, maybe there's not so much of an expectation for people on the internet to do that. But the reality is I get a lot of value from my comment section. I'm glad that for the most part, the vibe I'm cultivating here feels generative, even when it's critical, instead of like, you know, tearing each other down or one-upping each other. Yeah, and I think that's all I have to say. I am now officially done with this round of feedback and criticism and responding and back and forth. And in the next video, I will be resuming the standard sharing comments about the topic of the previous video. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.